What is the fallout from Meghan Markle's latest break with royal protocol? Will William start to take a stronger line with his brother? And why are some people thinking Prince Andrew could be exonerated? We have another packed show for you. Welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin and back this week after a trip with William and Catherine that took in land, sea and air is the Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English, and she's with her fellow star of the Daily Mail, Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. A reminder, please do join the more than 400,000 others who subscribe to this YouTube channel, and that way you'll never miss another episode, including a very special show we've got coming up next week. More on that for you in a little while. First up today, though, is William and Catherine's romantic trip to Scotland. And, well, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as a romantic royal trip without our own Rebecca English tagging along, the right royal gooseberry in the flesh.
Yeah, that's true.
But how did they seem, seriously?
Genuinely really happy. I mean, there was a few people said, I saw social media comments saying, oh, what a shame for them, they've gone away for their anniversary and all you lot are there. And actually, it was a working trip, but it happened to coincide with their wedding anniversary. So we were on the Isle of Mull, which is in the Inner Hebrides, and it is a beautiful, beautiful part of the world.
And you got lucky with the weather?
We got really lucky with the weather. In fact, William kept on saying how amazingly lucky we were with the weather. So they're there to kind of shine a spotlight on the tourism, the beautiful part of the world it is, the fact it's one of the larders of Britain, people were out in their throngs to see them, and it was just a really happy, lovely occasion.
Really buzzy. And I was on the Lorraine Kelly show the other day, and who's, for those who don't know, famously Scottish. Just so everybody knows, that's what it always looks like in Scotland.
Is that what she said?
Because it really doesn't, does it?
Well, I have to say, one of the ladies was saying to me, it was pelting down with rain the day before they arrived, so they really did see the island in its all its glory.
The royals brought the sunshine.
Yeah, they did.
Richard, how do you think that engagement will have been received and perceived?
I mean, I'm sure the people of that area and of Scotland generally will be delighted with the publicity. It's fantastic. You know, it really did make you think. I mean, we kind of know that area from a children's TV programme that we watched called Balamory, and that parade of the brightly coloured, brightly painted houses. So we sort of know it well, but I mean, what a great advert. So I think it will have gone down very well. And also I think it showed William and Catherine, obviously in a very positive light, sort of, showing them as our next king and queen. Clearly love each other, and they're very affectionate from these photographs. I mean, yes, they're on public display, but it's quite hard to sort of perform that. I think they did seem quite naturally happy together, and I think that came across. So I think everyone will be very pleased with the trip.
Indeed. And are you getting a sense, Rebecca, of how their longer trips compare to some of these shorter royal engagements?
Yeah, because of course it was actually the kind of the longest set of engagements Catherine's done since her cancer diagnosis, a year or so ago. And we haven't been on a kind of overnight trip with her like that for a while, even within the UK. I would still say it's quite measured. They were doing 2 or 3 engagements a day instead of 6 or 7 or 8 if you're on a foreign tour. But they were there at each engagement for a good hour or so. So they were kind of putting the hard yards in and making a point of trying to meet as many people within the local community as they can. So I still think it's slightly steady as she goes. But what was nice for me, and I think a lot of us there covering it, was it felt a bit more reassuringly normal. It was like we are getting back to how things used to be a little bit more.
One of the things that I know Richard will join me in having enjoyed is your WhatsApp updates on the actual journey.
Define enjoy, Jo.
I mean, tell us a bit. It's not a quick trip to get to Mull, is it?
No, because although we're part of the UK, and obviously compared to other countries like America and Canada, we're very small, but the transport is quite tricky, and I was, bemoaning it's first world problems. But I mean, even for me as a reporter to get there, it was a train, a plane, a taxi, a ferry, a walk, a taxi again, and then back to cover, basically one full day of engagement.
But that's part of its appeal, isn't it? I think, like, as a holiday destination, it's lovely, that idea of getting away from it all, and that the journey is part of the fun, I'd say.
You properly felt, when you were going on that ferry over to the island, you properly felt you were really going away. And actually, what was very interesting, a couple of people pointed out to me on social media that Isle of Mull and Tobermory, which is the main town they were in with the brightly coloured houses, were trending on social media, and that's what the local people want, is for people to go, wow, we must go there, we must have a look, because that's what the royal family are doing, is going and selling the best of Britain. So
you are such a soldier. The lengths you go to bring us the royal
I know,
stories.
but I think sometimes it's worth mentioning, because we do. You see actually a lot of people on social media kind of deriding the reporters. And look, I'm not curing cancer, I'm not a brain surgeon, but we work hard to bring the stories out there to people, because we're professionals and we want to do a good job.
And you do a marvellous job, and we're all very grateful for it. I'm sure you will agree. Well, on Monday, we'll be taking a much shorter trip to Buckingham Palace for a special episode to coincide with the commemorations for VE Day, where the royal family will of course be front and centre. So make sure you check that out on the Daily Mail Royals channel on Monday. But lots more to talk about today, of course, including the uproar caused by Meghan Markle using her HRH title. Before then, we had a surprise update on the King's health, and he's opened up about his daunting and frightening experience of being diagnosed with cancer. Rebecca, what can you tell us about what he had to say?
Yeah, it was a really moving and very deeply personal message. I think as far as it will go with the King, because he's not someone who wants to talk about I and me, unlike other people we'll probably go on to discuss later in the programme. But he was holding a reception for around 500 representatives, people who've experienced cancer, have lost people to cancer, but particularly organisations who are working in the community. And obviously this has particular resonance for him and his family because of Catherine as well. And he decided to write a foreword to a booklet they were all given, the guests, when they came in. And yeah, it was really powerful stuff. And he was talking about really how frightening it is when you first get that diagnosis. But then you actually, in a funny way, you see the best of people as well, because you realise how many amazing people are out there trying to help you get through this really frightening experience. And I tell you what was really interesting about the reception last night is one of the guests there was Sarah, Duchess of York, which we did not expect. She was quite a surprise guest. And that was obviously, she said that the King had personally invited her because obviously in the last year she's been through both breast cancer and skin cancer. And I thought that was a really lovely, magnanimous gesture of him to include her. And she was saying, as was everybody there, how brilliant it was that he'd been as open as he possibly could about his diagnosis, in terms of encouraging people to take hope.
I did love, I felt very proud. What my boss from one of my other jobs at ITV was photographed with him because she started the Check and Change choir. So I thought that was, did you see Helen there?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And actually I've got a message for them because they've asked if I could send them the videos I've got from the night. Because they said, we don't want them for commercial purposes, but just a lovely memory of a really special art evening.
Incredible.
So, yeah.
But Richard, what did you think of what Charles said? I think that, there are a lot of people who probably want some sort of like glowing final positive health measures. It wasn't quite that, was it? But it was inspiring.
I think it never will be with cancer. But I mean, what strikes me is it's really fascinating, sort of like a learning curve for us as a country almost, to have our monarch, have our head of state undergoing cancer treatment and being open about it.
Yeah.
We've talked on this programme before about how the King is the first monarch ever to be open about cancer. In the case of George VI, he didn't even know himself. He wasn't told when he was undergoing surgery that it was for cancer. So it's a whole new experience. Now, I think he's handling it well, but there are difficult questions. Like, he hasn't told us what type of cancer he's had, and that's been, I think, for specific reasons, because he doesn't want people to start, looking it up and speculating about how long he's got to live and all, survival rates and that type of thing. But I think in these comments, he really went as far as he could, and he also, was very keen to cite the example of Dame Deborah James, who really inspired a lot of people with the bravery and the attitude, her attitude towards cancer. So I think he is doing a lot of good in his own way.
It's that rebellious hope line, isn't it, that I think really resonates with people. Does the message around his treatment remain basically the same, Rebecca?
Very much so. And in fact, Buckingham Palace were at pains yesterday say, look, this is not an update on his health, and it is as it has been for the last few months. It's He's still a man who is living with cancer and is still undergoing very regular treatment, weekly, fortnightly, but everything is moving in a very positive direction. I think because we've heard from the Princess of Wales, who has officially used the word remission, it's what we want to hear from the King, but they are, as Richard says, they're being very open about this and saying, look, these are sometimes long, complex and arduous progress on these matters, but his doctors are really happy with the way things are going, and his diary is proving that with this packed diary of national and also international engagement. So they're saying, look, you should take a great deal of hope from that.
That's brilliant news. But Richard, maybe remind viewers why we do hear more updates about the King's health than the Princess of Wales's.
Yeah, I mean, Catherine has been quite open, she's been talking about it generally, but there's less of the need for the sort of updates because he is our head of state, so he's fulfilling that role, and so the public do have a right to know how well their head of state is, essentially. So there's more of an onus on him to keep the public informed, I think, and the palace is very aware of that. Whereas in Catherine's case, it's kind of up to her, I'd say, really. And so she's choosing to disclose what she wants.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's hear what you guys had to say after last week's show, because there were more than 3,000 comments. Thank you so much for those. Don't worry, I'm not going to read them all out, but we've got a few good ones. Lots of you discussing Harry's continued quest for taxpayer-funded security in the UK, like Paula, who says, listen, Tom Cruise has used the tube in London. Yes, he has security, but he has done it. He also doesn't complain. There are many examples of more prominent people getting around a city or town. I suppose Harry's argument would be that Tom Cruise wasn't born into this public life.
Well, his argument is there is an inherent danger in his just being here because of the virtue he was born into the British royal family.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, well, on the other hand, in a positive light, there was lots of love for our montage of Prince Louis, like this from RLW, who writes, oh my God, Louis. It's clear he delights and entertains his own family. He inherited the Middleton head thrown back, open mouth belly laugh. This is one of his mother's not often commented on, but most endearing traits. That's interesting. While Texana Simmons says, to me, Prince Louis looks a lot like a very young Prince Edward, especially around the eyes. What do we think about that?
God, it's not something I've noticed before.
No, I'm going to go back and have a look later on. We've got a couple of questions on the same topic now, like this from Ildi Amon. Rebecca, who has often brought up the low pay of royal staff and their loyalty despite that, why don't they pay them better or proper wages? It's not exactly great that the royals abuse the fact that people will always want to work for such a famous organisation and therefore don't pay people properly. While Margaret Jones asks, great show as usual, guys, thank you. Can I just ask, why is it often mentioned that people working for the royal family don't get a great wage? I would have thought that working for the most important family in British history, and indeed the world, would at least get a good salary, well above the going rate for that job. Yes, it's a privilege to work for such a family, but surely it goes above normal NDAs, etc. I think she might have answered her own question there, Rebecca, but what do you think?
Well, I was keen to raise this week because I saw some of these comments. I think it's important to say we can't read all 3,000 comments, but I know we all do try to read as many of the viewers' comments each week because I think it can help inform what people want us to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really fair question. And I think the way to answer it is that particularly when the people work for Buckingham Palace, their wages come out of what's called the sovereign grant, which is basically funded by taxpayers. It's a convoluted system, but that's what it boils down to. So there is an added responsibility and also kind of constraint on the palace that they can't, like a private company would do, and say, we've had great profits this year, you're a very valuable employee to us, we want to give you X salary. They can't do that because they're responsible effectively to taxpayers, and they can't start upping people's wages because then they'll need more money from us to pay for them. So there is that. I think sometimes when you see the figures stated, they look quite low. Maybe a gardener paid £16,000 to £18,000 a year, but that doesn't make clear that they get accommodation with that.
Right.
Other perks like health perks, which is in the UK, private health is not something that comes with the job. They certainly do have it at Buckingham Palace, and they've got a Palace gym, which I've never actually seen inside. I'd love to see Palace pool, things like that. So
there's a fascinating podcast about how mysterious the Palace pool is.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Is
we must do a link for it. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
So that there are constraints that there's really no choice that the Palace has to stick to, and I think people do the job for loyalty and for pride. So and they have more people wanting to work for Buckingham Palace than they have leaving, so they've got to be doing something right.
Well, we've talked about that before, haven't we? The incredible retention rates.
And also, I have to say that it is great for your CV, and perhaps that's why people are so keen to work there, because employers are queuing up afterwards to employ someone who previously worked at the Palace. So it is an attractive job. And
the training, actually, the on-the-job training they get, they even have a kind of butler's diploma, and valet's diplomas and things like that. They really invest in their people, and it does enable them to fly, when they choose to leave. But as I say, a lot of people stay there. I was in there the other day to do an interview with someone, and the gentleman opened the door, and I was like, "Oh my God, how long have you been doing this job?" And he was saying, "Well, I remember the late Queen," and they're really proud of being someone who works at Buckingham Palace and being the face of our head of state.
I wonder if, given our off-camera chat, how many of our other halves would survive Butler School. Can you imagine? We'll have to put
Give me an idea, Joe.
Let's put that to the test one day. Well, anyway, let's get back to the discussions now and to the controversy that's been infuriating royal fans on both sides of the Atlantic. Meghan Markle's HRH. Rebecca, do you care to begin to explain this to us?
Who would have thought the 3 little letters would be so problematic?
Well, we're about to find out.
We are,
yeah.
and they are problematic. This has all come about because Meghan gave an extraordinary interview in a podcast with a friend of hers this week. I mean, we'd need a whole programme to unpick that podcast in its entirety, some of the statements that she came out with. But it was the littlest detail that has created the greatest fuss, because 40 minutes into the podcast, and I was listening to it up in the Isle of Mull, and suddenly this little picture, quite a grainy picture, flashed up, clearly taken with someone's phone, which shows a basket of homemade preserves, ice cream and other goodies with a card on it, HRH, Duchess of Sussex, Meghan. And immediately I knew this was going to spark an absolute storm, because of course under the Sandringham Agreement, which is not formally written down in words, but it's kind of, I suppose for want of a better way, a gentleman's agreement, that they would not be using their HRHs for commercial purposes. Now obviously the Sussexes have immediately hit back and said, well, she's not using this for commercial purposes. This was a gift basket to a close friend of hers. I think it's something she never expected to be made public. But obviously it sparked a lot of questions about why even in private she's using that full title, Her Royal Highness, just in correspondence with friends. It's really quite extraordinary.
But I have to say though, I mean, the reason we know about it is because it's featured in the podcast. Why is Meghan doing this podcast? To promote her lifestyle brand. And this is not the first time. So we've seen it. Meghan herself posted on Instagram a message she had received, which was addressed to Your Royal Highness. So she wasn't embarrassed to publicise that. It seems quite the opposite. She's keen to make that point that she is a Royal Highness.
Am I misremembering, tell me if I am, that, when the famous Oprah interview, I don't remember exact quotes, but I certainly remember the flavour being, oh, we just want to leave all of that royal formality behind. We want to live these simple, authentic lives. So why is that HRH being used in any capacity?
Well, because I don't think those statements before were all true or authentic,
right.
I have to say, because I think it does mean a lot to them. And it's a cachet, and it's relevancy, and it's a selling point of their position, who they are, which is members of the royal family.
But I thought the royal family was this terrible thing that needed to be escaped. And
well, what's extraordinary is, where are they? They're in America, the great egalitarian country that doesn't respect titles, doesn't use them. Everyone's equal. So to be handing out gifts, like, yes, you might be doing it privately, but then addressed from HRH, the Duchess of Sussex, seems very strange. But remember, this is the couple who put out after the birth of their first child, Prince Archie, that he wouldn't have a title. They told sources close to them, such as their friend Omid Scobie, they said, no, we don't want titles, that sort of thing. But then they complained in that Oprah Winfrey interview about they were going to be denied titles. So they made a point of calling them Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. So it's something that they're really keen on.
It's hard to keep up, isn't it? What do you think, Rebecca? Do you think the palace, will they do anything? Have they done anything?
Well, they've deliberately not said anything about this because I think we discussed on the programme before, in the whole era of just let's not poke the bear and let's just, try and have a period of peace. I have spoken to people who were around at the time when the whole Sandringham summit took place, and I think it's fair to say there's a fair amount of eye rolling. It doesn't come as a surprise to them. I mean, certainly when you talk about the issue about Archie and Lilibet's titles, there was a lot of frustration, I think I've told you before, at the palace at the time, that there was an unwillingness to understand that it wasn't that they were being denied titles, but the way it worked was they wouldn't become HRHs and prince and princesses in their own right, their children, until their grandfather King Charles acceded to the throne. So it was a question of, look, we don't like to discuss this because obviously it means the loss of Queen Elizabeth, but it will come to you in time, and then it's up to you, should you choose to use them. And of course, as Richard said, absolutely they did.
Yeah.
There's a fair amount of eye rolling and attitudes of, well, this doesn't surprise.
Richard, you've written about what William might do about this when he's king.
Well, someone I spoke to this week compared Harry and Meghan to sort of rebellious teenagers that are trying to sort of, push the limits to see what they can get away with. And I really have got that impression myself over recent weeks. I mean, it's all part of this, Meghan's taken to social media with gusto. She really is. Every time I look at my phone, I've got, a new Instagram story from her.
It feels like she missed it, right?
She really is enjoying it.
Yeah.
I should say I've joined TikTok myself, so I might have to be...
well done, Richard. Get the plug in.
I might have to be competing with her for, But anyway, so she's seems to be, she's got a lot to promote, and that's why we're seeing it. But the question has been, would William act differently than his father, who, the king does seem to be indulgent, you could say. He's not taking action. He's trying not to provoke them at all. But people I've spoke to suggest that William would not be so tolerant, and perhaps he would strip them of their titles. But
Wow.
who knows? The thing is with William is he hopes that he won't become king for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think he's perhaps hoping that by that time things may have sorted themselves out one way or another. I don't know.
And everybody's friends again.
But I don't know. But the direction they're going at the moment is Harry and Meghan are pushing, the boundaries, I'd say.
Well, we'll put a link to that piece by Richard in the description below. Now, Rebecca, we've also had an unexpected appearance from the Prince and Princess, Archie and Lilibet, this week. What's that all about?
Yeah, so they are featuring a lot more on Meghan's social media, which again is social media which seems to be designed solely to publicise her commercial ventures. I think readers and viewers may have a view on that. It's her making some of more of this homemade jam. It's always the jam. I'll never get away from the jam. And you can hear Lilibet's voice and her mother saying to her, what do you think of it? And you can hear this kind of very cute little American voice going, I think it's beautiful. And it is actually very cute. But again, I think it will leave quite a lot of people uneasy because... Do you remember in one of the interviews she gave, she made a point of saying, why is it that the British media and the British public think they're entitled to kind of have public ownership of my child? And she was talking about how wrong she thinks it is for them to have to pose with their babies after they were born. And saying, I always remember very distinctly saying, it's like having a photograph on your desk in your office of your child and your co-workers saying, that entitles me to see every photograph of your child. And that's actually not what happens at all. William and Catherine, and hopefully we'll get some pictures of Charlotte this week because it's going to be her birthday. And, we've got a nice working situation where they happily issue a portrait of their children, and they will attend 1 or 2 public engagements a year. But that's it. And otherwise, they're entitled to live their lives as children, growing up privately as much as they want. So they only tend to feature on social media with their parents if there is a specific birthday or a specific state occasion. So it's not the case at all. So I think this idea of the children making increasing appearances on Meghan's social media, which is plugging a business venture.
I mean, let's not forget.
Start to wind people up.
Let's not forget, this is the couple who refused to give any details about the christening of Archie. I mean, they refused to even name the godparents, which is something which, you know, it's quite easy to access for a normal christening at a church, in the Church of England.
It should be a matter of public record.
You know, a matter of public record, and it always has been in the past. So they were that obsessed with the privacy. And then here you have, you know, video of the children being put to promote her brand.
Well,
so
that's kind of what your fellow Mail columnist Nadine Dorries, who was an MP in this country, she had a theory about that, didn't she?
Yeah, I think she's generally quite well disposed towards Harry and Meghan, but her view is that the children are being used for commercial purposes because they're being used to promote the brand. And I mean, I would say that's self-evident.
Well, on that topic, Meghan might be disappointed about her podcast reception over here.
Well, I'm not sure. It's sort of it's sort of dropped down the charts, I think, a bit. And it was notable. It's been beaten by certain podcasts. I mean, there was one. It was a guide to how to get to sleep. That had more listeners apparently.
Well, apparently you watched Palace Confidential.
I was going to say.
Yeah,
I was going to say it's
yeah.
not called Palace Confidential,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah, so you know those videos can be very useful, but no, I mean there doesn't seem to be huge interest in this. And again, there's been questions as well about. You know, who did Meghan want to get on her podcast? You know, was she hoping for really big names? The names haven't been so big this time. But who knows? I mean, the whole operation is smaller, isn't it? When they started, they were with, you know, the audio giant Spotify, and now it's with a company that we hadn't previously heard of. So I think it is all much more low-key.
Quick update for you now on Queens, Kings and Dastardly Things. That's the Mail's royal podcast we've been telling you about. This week, the panel discusses the state visitors. So unpleasant that Elizabeth II locked up the silver and hid in her own garden, and how the Windsors are related to Dracula, plus how state banquets have slimmed down from 5 courses to 3. Sounds amazing. All of this in this week's episode of Queens, Kings and Dastardly Things. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. Well, we've got a really terrible story now that we can't ignore this week. Rebecca, someone we've talked about a couple of times on the show recently is Virginia Duffrey, a woman who accused Prince Andrew of sexual abuse and received a payout. Andrew denies the claims. Obviously, now Virginia died this week.
Yeah, and
What
I think it's really important to say, regardless of what side of the fence you sit on this story on, that, you know, a young woman, a mother of 3 children, has, according to her family, lost her life by suicide. And I think that's a tragedy in anyone's books. And, you know, we know that she was going through a really difficult divorce from her husband. We know a couple of weeks ago there was that very strange business over the car accident she was in that she suggested had given her only days to live, and the police subsequently said no, it was a very minor prang, which I think suggests to someone who unfortunately was struggling with her state of mind. I wouldn't want to speculate any more than that. That's a matter for her family. We haven't heard anything from Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. I think that's probably right in the circumstances. But what I think is interesting is it has prompted some debate about maybe now is the time for Andrew to make good on the promise he made after that financial agreement with her, which he said he deeply regretted his association with Jeffrey Epstein, and that he would make up for that by helping to do work to protect the victims of trafficking around the globe. And we've actually seen very precious little of that, nothing at all that we know about. And some people saying maybe in her memory you could actually start to make good on that promise.
Would it be appropriate at some point to actually put that question to Prince Andrew?
Well, if you could get to him, yes, but he leads a very solitary life now. He has no official press spokesman. Occasionally you see the odd friend speaking to the media, And I've pointed this out to both the palace and to people I know associated with him many times. This is very unsatisfactory because he is still a public figure.
Yeah.
And if stories are being written about him, we as the media have a responsibility to put that to him, to give him a right of reply. And he doesn't even seem to want to have that. So, I don't know.
Well, speaking of appropriateness, I was absolutely staggered, Richard, that so quickly some of Andrew's supporters have treated this news as though it would help exonerate their friend.
Yes, I mean, there's been the most prominent one was probably Lady Victoria Harvey, who is an old friend of Andrew. I'm not sure that he would approve of, I'm sure he wouldn't really.
I really hope not.
Yeah, approve of comments she'd made, just sort of along the lines of, she's always, maintained that Virginia Giuffre was a liar and that sort of thing, guilty conscience. But no, it's all very unedifying. I mean, this is a woman who has had a very sad, troubled life.
Since a child.
Yeah, since her childhood, and it's come to end in the most appalling way. I mean, just think back to that photo taken in a mews house in Belgravia, where you had Prince Andrew with his arm round the waist of a 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre, and you had Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell by them side. Two of the people in that photo are now dead. One is in prison for human trafficking, and then there's Prince Andrew. So, the idea that he can sort of make a comeback or whatever, it's just appalling.
Well, you've preempted my next question because, Rebecca, I wanted to read you a quote from a piece written by your colleague Richard Kay this week. He said, Andrew will be forever associated with a photograph that shows him smiling into the camera, his hand around the bare waist of a fresh-faced Miss Giuffre when she was 17. Do you agree? And importantly, do you think the royal family agrees?
I think it was a very good piece by Richard. He is a brilliant writer, and I think it asked some very pertinent questions because, of course, if it wasn't for that photograph, there would be no evidence that they'd ever even met. There are flight logs that suggest they might have been on the same flight at the same time, but he could easily say, but I never saw her, I never spoke to her. Assuming, I think as most people do, you accept that photograph is genuine. It does place her with him, and I think it's very difficult for him to ever hide from. It's going to be there as a constant reminder of this really awful story and the awful period in the lives of everybody involved. And I think, again, it just emphasises, I think I said on the programme before, why many believe the King is right to have taken the actions that he has in trying to distance Andrew from any suggestion he would return to public life. It's why he's been trying to persuade him to downsize from Royal Lodge to get somewhere more affordable, so he doesn't have to take these kind of risks with his personal and his business and professional life again. Whether he'll ever solve the problem that is Prince Andrew is another question.
Well, do you think this development might push envelopes one way or another in that respect?
I hope so. I mean, personally, I'd like to see him get involved with the charity. I highlighted in my diary column the other day how his daughter, Princess Eugenie, has done really well, raising a lot of money with her organisation that she started, Anti-Slavery Collective, so she's doing good work with that. And for goodness sake, Andrew, just get stuck into something, and even if it's in a minor role, that would be good to see. But I think also, his brother, the King, could help him by giving him some sort of worthwhile role.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it could be, but just something to keep him occupied, give him a sense of self-worth, and do something useful to help other people.
It's just such a dreadful situation all round. But we move on. This show has a lot of moving parts. To the King's other siblings now. Prince Edward and Sophie made a trip to America this week, Richard.
Yes, it was actually just Prince Edward in this case. He, sometimes they have trips together, other times it's apart. In this case, Prince Edward went to America. He's stayed in New York and Philadelphia. It was mainly engagements connected with the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which he's now patron of, created by his father. And there was one thing that struck me actually. When he was in Philadelphia, he was touring with the mayor, and she had to go down some steps, and I think she was probably wearing high heels, so he offered his arm for her to take, which I thought was a nice bit of chivalry.
Chivalry is not dead.
But Sophie's been busy herself, and there's one thing she was up to, highlighted in my column, which was she was down the bingo. She,
I love a bit of bingo.
Yeah,
now that is unexpected.
She attended bingo night at the Royal Hospital Chelsea with the Chelsea pensioners. I think viewers of this programme might have seen them in their distinctive coats and tunics. So she joined them for an evening, and I don't know if she won, but she clearly had some fun.
Bingo. Have you ever played bingo?
Oh, I used to play it all the time with my grandparents when I was little. And actually, during lockdown, William and Catherine played bingo. They did a bingo session on one of those video calls we used to all do with a pensioners' home, and that was really good fun because they were doing all the nicknames like, you know, two little swans and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I learn something new about you every day, Rebecca. But it does seem quite low key, this trip for Edward. Deliberately so?
Well, that's kind of the way they like it. You know, they don't have a big press contingency going with them, which is how people find out about these trips. You know, they choose not to invite the press along on a lot of things. And we can't, as I was talking about at the start of the programme, about how busy we are. You know, members of the royal family do thousands of engagements a year, and sometimes we do have to pick and choose because we can't be at every one. I mean, you know, I arrived back from Scotland and finally got to bed about 2 o'clock this morning, and the minute we finished recording, I'm off to Windsor to do
And look, she still looks radiant.
Fresh as a daisy.
Yeah.
I wasn't fishing for compliments.
Well, you
Joe.
got one anyway.
But I'm saying, you know, so we have to pick and choose, and actually they prefer a lot of these jobs just to get on with them without the kind of additional hassle of having media there and just put it out over social media. But the downside is, I think it means that they don't get as much of a pat on the back as they deserve, which is why I try to write big features when they have significant kind of wedding anniversaries or birthdays. And I did a big piece about Sophie early on this year when she turned 60, and talked to a lot of her friends on the record. Last year I even sat down with Prince Edward and had a chat with him. So I try to shine a spotlight on them, on what they do when I can, when it's the right occasion.
And I'm sure they love that. Now, can you hear that? It's time to celebrate our unsung royal hero of the week. And Rebecca, to a story you wrote about a bit of an old favourite in this category, Princess Anne.
Well, it's actually thanks to Palace Confidential viewers that I did, because we discussed her at church. In fact, Richard, you were asked a question, weren't you, the other week about her at church on Easter Sunday, and how there was a lot of social media commentary that she didn't speak to the Dean of Windsor afterwards. And we had so many comments on it. Again, we read your comments.
Yes.
That she seemed to be in a little bit of pain. I thought, right, I'm going to put my detective hat on, get to the bottom of this. So thank you, Palace Confidential viewers. And so I spoke to a few people, spoke to the Palace, and found out actually she was in a lot of pain. She had an accident, another one, at her Gatcombe Park estate. She didn't need medical treatment, unlike the one last year where she was obviously in intensive care for 5 days, but it has left her with a badly bruised leg. And that's why she was leaning on her umbrella a lot. That's why she didn't kind of hang around standing for a bit and left pretty quickly. But she did fly straight to Turkey to do engagements for the King.
What a trooper.
She is an absolute trooper. Notably, actually, and it makes sense, I saw several pictures of her wearing a trouser suit. And again, that's quite unusual. She does wear trousers a lot, but on the kind of engagement she was on, I thought that was quite surprising. You wouldn't expect to see her in a dress and a jacket or a skirt suit, and actually now it makes sense.
So here's what I'm intrigued by is, now you asked the Palace and they willingly told you she had an accident, but it wasn't something that they felt was something to tell us.
No, because
uninvited.
Because she didn't go to hospital.
Right.
She didn't need any medical treatment at all. It didn't stop her undertaking her public duties. So obviously, I think they're right in saying we don't have a right to know about it.
Yeah, I was just curious because she's starting to be a bit of it's slightly worrying, isn't it?
She obviously was in pain. You could see her wincing as she came up those stairs outside St George's Chapel.
But I think it's like a lot of these things. If you ask a fair question, I actually said to them, we've had a massive reaction from our Palace Confidential viewers, and it would be really nice to explain to them what actually was going on. And so in this case, the people I spoke to were happy to talk about it.
They wanted the Palace Confidential viewers to know.
They did know, they genuinely did, so thank you.
And for carrying on through whatever is thrown at her, Anne is our hero of the week.
Absolutely.
All the time. Right, well, to someone we assume will be a future Princess Royal now, I'm of course talking about Princess Charlotte, who Rebecca mentioned earlier turns 10 this week, the day after we record this programme. We thought we'd mark the occasion by making her the star of our world famous montage. Enjoy. Happy birthday, dear Charlotte, from all of us here at Palace Confidential, and a reminder that our very special VE Day show from outside Buckingham Palace, complete with a wealth of great British pomp and pageantry, will be on the channel on Monday and you won't want to miss it. Subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel so you don't miss the notification for that. Just time now to say thanks to Rebecca, to Richard and to you for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.